Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. Oh, I am so excited that you guys are here. And give me 1 minute. I'm just connecting to Instagram because I want everybody to enjoy this special guest that I have today. 1 second, and it looks like, hey, did we connect?
Yeah, I'm here.
And
Oh,
yeah, we're connected.
oh, good.
So hello, beautiful people. Welcome to my channel. Today, we are still talking about the ultimate raw vegan bundle. And I have Chris Kendall, who has been on my show before, here again. I'm super excited to have you here, Chris. And I just wanted to say that, the ultimate raw vegan bundle is only going to be available until May 11th. It's a wonderful, amazing group of collaborators. And if you want to get yours, if you're on the fence, go ahead and hit either one of our bios. You can get the link, and it's $50. And I promise you, no matter where you are in your health journey, you will find something that's fascinating and wonderful. And so one of the things that Chris put in there is a book that you wrote, Less is More Myth, right? You wrote a book in there that's called Raw Truths, Exposing the Top 10 Myths. Is that correct?
Yeah, exposing the top 10 myths that can be sabotaging your raw food journey. Thanks so much for having me back on. And it's a fun book and a fun topic. May not be fun for some that really are ingrained with these myths, but it'll be enlightening and make this lifestyle a lot easier for them.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you again for coming on to talk about this. We're going to just talk about one of the chapters in the book, which I honestly think is a really important topic. And I also think that it can fall into any eating styles, and that is the less is more myth, and how under eating can really, it can hurt your health.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so, clarifying the myth, so you talk about the less is more myth when it comes to eating.
Yeah.
Where do you think this belief comes from, especially in the raw or the plant-based community?
Well, truthfully, I think it comes out from outside of the plant-based raw food community, but then finds its way in, unfortunately, because it doesn't really fit. And I mean, there are definitely studies, promoting this myth, and rather, sorry, apologies for that. There are studies that promote this on a standard American diet, intake restriction, having good results. But again, it doesn't really translate over to a raw food diet very well. And by definition, it doesn't work well. If we're getting less than we need, obviously it's not optimal. But most people on most diets are getting so much more that it can sound accurate to say, well, if you eat less, you'll have better health results, because less on a standard American diet still is going to mean they're getting adequate calories. Whereas when we're talking about a raw food diet, the lowest caloric density foods on the planet, they're the richest in fiber and water content and just so big, eating less really can create issues.
Yeah, it's really interesting because as you were talking, I mean, I can remember even as a teenager, just being brought up just for whatever reason was the norm, right? You want to eat less because you don't want to gain weight, you want to exercise more, and those are myths that you're right. I can remember with the standard American diet, and a lot of people, still believe that. I have been with family or at just different events, and have heard other people's conversations about that. And so I'm really excited that you put this myth in there, that we can talk about it, and then for people that are trying to, like me, right, we're moving more into the raw, experimenting, exploring, kind of figuring it out. I remember that when I first started doing this, I thought I was full. It's 20 or 30 minutes. I just ate, I chewed it seemed like forever because I'm getting all this stuff in. And then all of a sudden I find that I'm hunting around for something to eat, for example. And so I'm wondering, what are the common signs that someone, you think you're eating a lot, even though you're not paying attention to the caloric intake, right? And so then you're like, I just ate, so I can't be hungry still. So you may restrict. So what would you say in reference to some of that?
Well, when we're talking about a raw food diet, again, that is the lowest caloric density foods out there, especially greens and vegetables, those are the absolute lowest. And next to that would be fruit. It takes a while for us to get used to the volumes, not only conceptually, but also digestively. Our stomach is elastic. Our insulin function is dependent upon a whole wide range of functions based on what we eat, even the timing of what we eat, and how much sleep we get, and optimizing our lifestyle in terms of a lower fat approach, which is what we're all promoting throughout this bundle, as well as through habitually eating large amounts and slowly eating more. Again, specifically when we're talking about these high water content, high fiber foods, it does take some time, and it also takes some know-how, because if we think like, okay, raw food diet, so I'm going to base it around strawberries and carrots and watermelon, well, those are really low calorie density foods, and it would take like astronomical amounts. So understanding that those can have a great part in the diet, absolutely. But in order to actually get enough calories on a fruit-based approach, it's important to have at least some sweet fruits, or if not, an abundance of sub-acid fruits, which are going to be a little less water content and a little bit higher caloric density, especially the sweet fruits. And also knowing, having a little bit of nuts and seeds in there can help bring up the calorie density, as well as nutrient density and certain nutrients as well. So it takes both some time, some patience, as well as that know-how.
Okay, that's great. So, just an example, would that be when you talk about less watery, would you that be like bananas, or, what would be an example of that? Because I think berries, but I don't know, because everything has water. So how do you kind of how do you figure that out? Is there an example you can share?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, the kind of written definition would be dividing fruits into different categories. So, you have the melons, which are going to be the most watery of all, and those are self-explanatory. They're super water rich and they're low in calories, but they're great foods. They're absolutely great foods. Next, we'd have acid fruits, which are going to be typically kind of tart, and they're typically juicy as well. So we got the lemons, limes, pineapples, kiwis, strawberries actually fit in there. And those too are low in calories, typically lower actually than the melons, but pretty similar. Next to that, we have subacid, and those are getting a little less watery. They still can be juicy like a peach. I mean, all stone fruits are in that subacid category. All other berries besides the strawberry, we got things like mangoes in there, and we got usually grapes are fitting in there. And there is some variance in here because, if you have like a really tart grape, it might be closer to the acid. If you have a really sweet grape, it might be closer to the sweet fruit. And, we like to put things in boxes, and this is a way to describe it, but it's not, like as simple as boxes. There is a little bit of variance, right? And then the sweet fruits, they're going to be all dried fruits. They're going to be a lot of tropical fruits like jackfruit and mamey, which some people may have never heard of, or champadak. But you can also get the more common ones like the bananas and the pears and the dates and the figs, and anything like persimmons, cherimoyas sometimes are put in subacid, sometimes they're put in sweet, sugared apples, custard apples, all those good things. So typically speaking, it's those ones that if you were thirsty, you wouldn't think of eating, as quenching your thirst. Those are going to be the sweet, sweet fruits. And in fact, the sweeter the fruit is, the less quenching it is, even if it is water rich. So, for example, you can have a watermelon, which most people think is like, this is just super, super hydrating. And you're right, it is hydrating compared to other foods that are more dry. But because of the sugar content, if you have a super, super sweet watermelon, like top tier sweet watermelon, the amount of sugar in there will actually require the amount of water in the melon for your body to metabolize, because it takes roughly about 7 grams of water per gram of sugar to be actually taken up by the body and incorporated into your muscle tissue and all that good stuff. So in those cases, a watermelon can actually just leave you baseline. And that's why actually it's really important. If you're thirsty, it's important to drink water. People on this movement, that's another myth I didn't go into, but a lot of people are preaching, no, you don't need water at all. You just eat fruit and vegetables. And while you can do it, you're going to have a higher level of hydration. You're going to be easier on the organs of elimination, and you're going to have a better time with insulin function and sugar metabolism if you stay hydrated by drinking water when you're thirsty and eating fruit when you're hungry, no matter what the water content of the fruit is.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So, and you know what? I, for a long time, would measure out my daily water and put it on the counter and then would refill just to make sure that I knew, because I sometimes forget to drink, right? And then there are times when I'm so thirsty. There was a time when I was so thirsty all the time that I actually depleted myself of minerals. So there is a fine line. But when I started eating, like, you know, a lot more fruits, I thought, I'm not thirsty. I just had this. So, you know, I just had this gigantic watermelon. It's filled with water and the fiber and all of those things. I don't really need to do that. And you're right. It does slow down everything, including digestion and elimination. And so I have recently had a conversation with a friend who was reminding me that, you know, you want to help move all the fiber. You want to help even if it has the water in here. So I'm so glad that you just shared a detailed explanation of that. I do want to just take a minute. We have some people in the chat. Janet or Jan says, good day, everyone. Welcome. I love getting the raw bundles, and I have never been disappointed with one. One gains so much, so many recipes and information from the bundles. And yeah, and then Diane Price is on Instagram. Hello, and hello to Janet. And she also said, wow, interesting about the watermelon. So yeah, it is a really good thing. And of course, I know a lot of you are watching and not chatting, but if you have a question, a thought, anything, please, we welcome it, and we will try to, you know, interact and get your questions answered and talk about it. So I do want to ask you, so here you are eating all of this food. How do you know when you're full? Like I started to share about, you know, I thought I was hungry again. Like,
yeah.
How do you know when you're full? Or maybe, you know, well, let's start there.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of funny because we can become so far removed from our bodily needs that we don't have clear signals anymore. And so that's when it can kind of get tricky. So if someone's coming from a SAD diet, or they're used to eating lots of fat, and they have, you know, insulin resistance built up in their muscle tissues, and they have higher levels of fat going through their system, you can be tricked into feeling satiated far before you're really meeting your caloric demands. So on most diets, most people, their meals usually are at least 500 calories and up to 1,000 plus, depending upon how many meals you eat a day, what types of food you eat a day, how big you are, your activity level, all these kinds of things. But it's really common for people just to be used to a certain volume of food, especially if they're not used to a raw food or raw centric diet. You know, they're used to eating cooked foods that have the water driven off, that are more calorically dense. And the stomach is, as I mentioned, it is elastic. So it's only really the size of a bit bigger than a fist, but it can get quite big, you know, and it's really designed to be able to do that, to come out and then to come right back down. So in the beginning stages of applying a high water content, high fiber, raw food diet, it may take having between 3 to 5 meals per day in order to get enough calories. And it may mean that you're having those meals a little bit closer together than you're used to if you're eating cooked, kind of more calorie dense, condensed foods. So it isn't abnormal to be hungry a little bit earlier than you're used to. But ways you can mitigate that, again, is to concentrate at least one. And I usually find people new to the diet really benefit from having 2 meals a day that are really either sweet or sub-acid fruit focused, often one sweet, one sub-acid, maybe a melon or an acid fruit based meal that may start their dinner salad. And that way, when you're eating a more calorically dense fruit, like, you know, a banana smoothie, or, you know, a banana pudding, or pears, or persimmons, or whatever is in season and delicious, then you're going to be more satiated, you're going to feel more full, and it's going to keep you full longer. Now, one thing I'll also add to that as well, though, is that it does take some time. It does take some adjustment. It does take kind of that know-how, understanding the different caloric densities of different fruits, you know? So it's not necessarily an overnight process, but it does come with time, and it can happen pretty readily quick if you find your balance right between eating as much as you enjoy and as much as you can. And When I say as much as you can, I'm not saying forcing, I'm not saying go past enjoyment really, but if you're feeling like, I think I'm full, you could probably have a couple more bites. Again, it's so high in water content, which really gets absorbed in the stomach incredibly quickly. If you feel uncomfortable, it's going to be for like a minute or two, and then your stomach is going to come back to its normal size. But it is through viewing this lifestyle from as one of abundance, where it's actually harder to overeat these foods than it is to undereat these foods, that we slowly march in that direction where meal size goes up and meal frequency goes down. Because I remember eating 4 and 5 meals a day and thinking I was eating the biggest meals ever and feeling like I was eating all day. And then slowly those meals became really small and my frequency went down. And for example, now I usually eat 2 meals a day. And like for me, less than 12 bananas is a snack. Like it really legitimately feels like a snack if it's less than 12 bananas. So, but that said too, I'm like 180 pounds and, 6'1" and quite active, right? So for you, that would be ridiculous to assume you'll ever necessarily get the 12 as a snack, but it's all relative to you, your lifestyle, and your weight and size and activity level.
Okay, that's awesome. So let's see. On Instagram, we have Wendy Vandergritten,
Yeah.
and yeah, welcome. Let's see, what did she say? Let me just see if I can see what she was talking about. I don't have it in front of me right now, but just basically that you need water. That watermelon needs water, and so yes, you're absolutely right. Running on plants says less is more. Also makes me think about calorie deficient diets good for longevity. Is that a myth?
Well, again, by definition, if we're not getting enough, we're not getting enough. Like in order to truly thrive, we need enough of everything, and again, when we're talking about caloric deficient diets or we're talking about caloric restriction, short term people use those for weight loss, but long term, if you're trying to actually be accurate, it's impossible to be long term on a deficient diet. It's just not really the case. What we're talking more about is caloric optimization. It's about getting enough, but getting enough from really nutrient dense foods, because again, most people, when we're studying caloric restriction, we're talking about standard American diets that are diets of excess. They're not only diets of excess in terms of calories, they're excess in terms of certain nutrients. And, we're looking for enough of all of them in a balance, right? So to me, it's a misconception. Instead, caloric optimization and getting enough is a much more sound way to experience robust health.
Okay. And Wendy said that she had 8 bananas today and a snack. So
Oh,
good for
nice.
you.
Nice. Yeah.
And running on plants, I did also want to welcome you and say hello. I have a question myself, which is, so if I didn't eat, let's say the 8 bananas, I'll do the one that Wendy said since we're both female, and I'm assuming about the same size since we've connected before. So let's say I had 5 bananas instead, and I don't want any more. I feel like I'm done with bananas, but I also am thinking about another food, or maybe it's the big salad and I don't want to quite finish it. I could
Yeah.
sometimes I find that in my head, and then I'm like, okay, what am I looking for? Like, because I'm not actually 100% full. So
Yeah.
what would you say to a transitioning person who might be in that same place? And I think that has to do with old behaviors, but you
Yeah,
tell
for
me.
sure. Well, there's a few angles to this. I mean, one, I'd say it's advantageous to get out of the head and get into the body, and trust its instincts. The mind is great, and a lot of times though it leads us astray. So listening to our body, in some circumstances, it fits perfectly to push it aside and come back to it 15 minutes later when some of the water content is permeated through the stomach walls and it's become smaller, and all of a sudden your satiation triggers are like, oh wait, I could actually have a little bit more volume. Come on, have a little bit more here, But that's also where, variety can be really advantageous. So for example, if you just eat bananas, your satiation is going to be super sharp and it's going to be like you've had enough. And that can be related to nutrition, but it also can be related to how efficient your insulin function is at that given point in time, right? Because again, if you undersleep, if you get like a 5 hour sleep, you can actually metabolically be considered uh, pre-diabetes. Like And that's not long-term, but it actually, that's how much sleep affects our insulin function. If we're chronically stressed, well, we're not going to have sharp insulin function. If we are habitually eating a higher fat diet, or even if we ate lots of fat the night before, late at night, and we didn't digest it well, the next morning we can still actually be experiencing lower insulin sensitivity, which can then lead us to feeling like, nope, that's too much. Like I've had too much sugar already before we're coming anywhere near meeting our caloric needs. So it can really be a bunch of those different things. The solution to that really, though, is one, maintaining on average a lower fat diet. In general, less than 15% of our total calories really sharpens insulin function and allows us to more easily eat large quantities of our, nature's perfect food, or nearest to perfect food, fruit. And otherwise, we can get activity before we do any kind of, sweet fruit meal, because then we're burning muscle glycogen and we're actually creating demand for new fuel to come in, which will really make it easier for us to eat larger volumes. And then the other thing too is just to respect exactly where you are, right? It's like if you eat a 5 bananas, you're like, okay, that's good enough. Well, wait, or otherwise, if you're like looking around, you still want something more, well, switch it up. That's a concept called sequential eating, and if we're just eating one food at a time, in the beginning, for a lot of people, it can actually be a little bit harder to eat appropriate levels of calories. Let's say if we're just bananas for breakfast, or sorry, melon for breakfast, bananas for lunch, tomatoes and zucchini salad for dinner, like it can be a little bit easier to subtly undereat. Whereas if we have something like, say, a melon fruit salad for breakfast, we have bananas, and then we sequential eat. So we eat bananas till we're good, and then we maybe have some figs, maybe some dates with lettuce. We mix it up. The different flavors, the different textures, the different mineral and nutrient densities can really help us to actually eat a little more. And in fact, a big trick sometimes when we're kind of newer to this and we're feeling a little bit like, you have some bananas, you start to feel like, ooh, this is getting too sweet. This is a little bit too much. Like I still want more food, but I'm starting to get sweeted out. A good trick for that is to have some lettuce or celery on hand and just have a couple bites of that. And once you have that juicy, mineral dense kind of savory flavor, very often, all of a sudden you look back at the banana and you're like, that's actually looking good now. And that actually will help you to eat a little more. And again, slowly expand the stomach. And also it helps with the insulin function. So again, if we're new to the diet and we're not having really sharp insulin function, including greens with your sweet fruit can really help mitigate that and make it easier to eat enough volume.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. Great tips. Emily BH said, Dr. Doug Graham, Dr. Robert Morris, Lauren Lockman, world-renowned fasting expert Ellie Martin?
Yep.
Fruitarian stuntman, all say the sign you're full when you lose the taste or desire to eat anymore. So yes, and that's pretty much what you're saying. And I started reading the 80-10-10 book, which you shared with me. And if you're not familiar with that, you got to go to Chris's link here and order yourself a copy. And it's really great in helping to understand the different the 80% carbohydrates, and then the 10% protein and 10% fat. It's very interesting. I do want to say hello to Marilyn. I want to say hello to Nan. Are there any other questions? I'm just looking. And so let's see. Emily BH says it isn't about calories, they say. So I think that that's pretty much what you're saying here, right? I mean, to a point, because it's interesting that I'm reading this book and I'm hearing what you share, and we're talking about myths. I know in standard American diet, or the way that I was raised, there was always talk about calories, but restricting them. Whereas now you want to make sure you get enough calories. So calories do play a part in here, would you say?
Oh, 100%. It's very predictable. While the calorie model isn't exact, it is the best we have, and is predictable. If you're eating more calories than you burn, you're going to gain weight. And if you're eating less calories than you burn, you're going to lose weight. So these are the laws of thermodynamics. And, while people make claims that they can, biohack and get rid of those, which I really go in depth into in that chapter, it isn't demonstrably true. So for example, some people say, once you've fasted long enough in my specific way and you've removed all the mucoid plaque, then you can live off half the calories, which again is not demonstrably true. And another myth in the book is mucoid plaque, which doesn't exist in the first place, right? So oftentimes, there are philosophical viewpoints, and that's what a lot of these myths hit, are like philosophical viewpoints or shock value kind of virality driven concepts that people latch onto and really want to believe, and people promote because it's a good business model, or they mistakenly believe them, but it doesn't make it true. So there is much more than just calories. I really look at it like we have three main modes of satiation, and those are calories, nutrition, and volume. And we're always looking to get enough of all three of these main things, right? But on a standard American diet, which is deficient in volume, it's really high in calories and it's lower in nutrition per calorie, we're always starving. And that's why people on standard American diets, they eat too much. They're always snacking. They're always thinking about food. It's like a constant cycle. And it's one that's really hard to break. But when we turn into a diet of abundance made up with fruits and vegetables that are really high volume, are really high nutrition per calorie, but they're low calorie per volume, it's actually subtly easy to undereat because we're meeting two of our three main needs very easily. And that's why it actually takes a little bit of a reframing and some time to adjust to be able to eat appropriate volumes to get our caloric needs met.
So, yeah, so when you mention that under eating can actually lead to more cravings and less satisfaction,
Huge.
can you explain how that works physiologically as well as emotionally?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, non surprisingly, the number one reason people fall off the raw food diet is not getting enough calories. And I mean, that can be kind of matched with just poor education around it, right? But generally speaking, when people are under eating calories, they're going to be blowing through their adipose tissue faster, their fat stores, which means they're going to be detoxifying at an accelerated rate. And faster isn't always better. People, generally end up feeling like they're stressed out, wanting to pull out their hair, and like everything looks good, and they're driven towards cooked foods and fatty foods, and anything starts to look good. They're starting to spike their cortisol and other stress hormones, and it leads to also just bad health outcomes, low energy, fatigue, having a hard time sleeping. So it's just not a really happy scenario.
Yeah. And I did read a lot of your chapters. They were very interesting. So there's a lot. This is just one that we're talking about. And so if you get the bundle, you'll see there's a lot of myths and a lot of different topics. And I already learned a lot myself.
I'm
So
happy to hear.
yeah. So you talk about craving volume,
Mhm.
especially from the fruit. So what role does caloric density play in helping us feel satisfied on a raw or whole food plant-based diet?
Mhm. Well, I think in part that is where greens come in. Like they're the most nutrition rich, nutrient dense foods per calorie out there, right? And fruit is amazing. Like getting enough calories from fruit for a lot of people is the easier side, but getting enough volume of vegetables can take some time, because if we're not used to eating these fiber rich plant foods and we just all of a sudden start adding a whole bunch, we might experience bloating, indigestion, some gas, and just feel a little bit uncomfortable. And part of this is because most of us, again, we're just not used to eating anywhere near that volume. And if we just take on a whole bunch, it overloads our digestive system, and our microbes, our microbiome isn't adapted to be able to actually help us out to digest easily all that amount of greens. So a secret for that, to make sure that you're more satiated, is to include greens, and maybe include them even at every meal. You don't have to, but include them often in small amounts so that your microbiome can get a chance to catch up. So your hydrochloric acid, which is required to break down proteins and really helps with breaking down greens in general, slowly goes up. And there actually have been studies showing that if you just have a green smoothie every day and you include a little bit of greens, for a salad and stuff like that, over time, and we're just talking about days and weeks and a month, that your HCl starts to go up, your ability to eat larger volumes of greens and vegetables goes up, and it just leads to even higher levels of satiation and satisfaction.
I love that. I love that. We've got a lot of comments going on. Thank you so much. So Raw King Kong says green smoothies help me feel more satisfied than just fruit smoothies. 100%.
Yep. Yep. They really do. Yeah. I mean, that's in part because of the fiber, in part because of the nutrient density. It also slows it down. It regulates the blood sugar even more. So if anyone has any blood sugar issues, or again, they're coming from a higher fat diet, including those greens is of paramount importance. And in general, for longevity, I mean, one of the myths I go into is the fruitarian myth. And, a common thread with a lot of these things, again, is they're philosophy based, but this book brings more than just philosophy.
Yeah. And Emily BH says, whereas the rest of us who eat more calories are not absorbing nutrients the way we should. Do you have any comments to make on that?
I'm not 100% I understand.
Go
Where
ahead.
is that
Can you put
comment?
that? Can you put that up there, hun?
Well, where is the rest of us who eat more calories are not absorbing nutrients the way we should? So there are a few things that can come into play there. I mean, when we're talking about simple meals of fruit, it is usually hard for people to overeat unless, again, they're forcing it and eating emotionally and basically like almost like anger eating it or depressed eating it. I encourage everyone to come into a calm, balanced state, to do the best they can to come into relaxation without any symptoms before they eat. A lot of people, and I think this is a really key concept, a lot of people think that hunger is anxious and irritable and urgent and painful and headachy. 9 times out of 10, if you ask someone, what is hunger? They're like, oh, a headache, and like my stomach is growling. But really, that's our body finishing off the last period of assimilation and detoxification. It's just like a cigarette smoker being in between cigarettes. All of a sudden, when their body's starting to process the garbage that they took in, then they're like, I need another cigarette to mitigate those symptoms, to stop the body from having those symptoms.
Wow.
Whereas instead, if we realize that that's just the body finishing out a cycle, and it's better to be observed or to be facilitated by having some sips of water, doing some deep breathing, taking a walk, jumping on the rebounder, getting a little bit of movement, talking to a friend, taking a bath, like anything that can just help us get through that slight discomfort, because that usually only lasts 10, 15 minutes. And if you get through to the other side, when you're in a calm, balanced state, you'll notice all of a sudden your mouth starts salivating. And when you look at any food, it looks good. Whereas when you're in that cranky state where like you're hangry, which people think is hunger and really isn't, I might say, hey, well, like, I'm so hungry. Like, I just need to eat. And you're like, here's some apples. You're like, no, 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 no. I just want French fries. And it's like, what's going on here? But if you just give it 15 minutes and again, help facilitate it, have a sip of water, do all these things, you're going to come through to a more calm, balanced state where when you eat, one, your body's way more ready for it. It's going to be more efficient at actually digesting, assimilating, and detoxifying anything else going on in the body. And everything is just going to be smoother. Plus, you're forming a much more balanced, sound relationship with food, your emotions, and yourself. And no matter what you eat, even if you're not like, I want to be a raw foodist, no matter what you eat, I assure you, if you employ that and recognize, again, it's usually only 15 minutes, you're going to experience leaps in your digestion and your health overall. Now, one last thing that I'll mention that if I can still see, so if we're forcing it, that's gonna lead to suboptimal digestion. If we're not aware of food combining at all, like I don't think food combining is a rule book, but it is a tool for optimal digestion. So if we're experiencing poor digestion, it can be really useful to try on the concepts of food combining and see if it helps you, to make sure you're getting enough sleep and that you're chewing really, really well. Gandhi said, chew your drink and drink your food, and that's a really good concept to take home as well. So, and yeah, just make sure you're not stressed out when you're eating and you're not forcing it. This is a diet of abundance, but it's also one where we respect our body's intuitive kind of markers, like we said, like you don't want to be feeling disgusted by it. You don't want to be forcing it till it hurts. It's just finding that balance between as much as you genuinely enjoy and a bite or two more.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm listening to you and it's like, it's an experience. eating is an experience, yoga is an experience, breathing when you're mindful is an experience. And in the more standard living, it's like what you said. Oh, I have a headache. Oh, I need chocolate. I don't want the apple, kind of thing, like what you were saying.
Yeah.
And sorry about the noise in the background. It's interesting about how you're sharing, because if we can shift our mind to thinking about it as an experience and taking that time to make it something joyful and giving the breaks, right? I think that that's something just to highlight for people.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I want to thank you for that. We have a lot more people coming in. Hi, John Yu, and Moonlight. Here's a question.
Yep.
How come I experience feeling so full sometimes once I eat fruit all day and then have my big salad at night? Like sometimes I feel so full I can't even eat anymore, even if I wanted to. It's not really a question. Well, yeah, I guess that is a question. So is any suggestions for Moonlight?
Well, it is a little hard to generalize without knowing more about her and what specifically she's eating, the timing of it, all the other aspects that we kind of mentioned, whether we're eating when we're in a calm, balanced state, or if we're eating when we're stressed out, if we're, chronically stressed, if we're well hydrated, if we have a really high body fat percentage, or if we're active and athletic. All of these things are going to come into play, but yeah, it is just really hard to generalize without knowing more, and may not be very professional to do, I don't think, in that case.
And we have another question here from John Jew. Love it. Hi, all. Just hopped in. Welcome. Can we live well on smoothies with at least 8 to 10 different whole food plant ingredients? I want to eventually bring this concept to our underserved communities. Great info.
I mean, everything is relative. Like, what is living well? Like, is it relative to what most people are doing? Is it relative to the healthiest people on the planet? Is it equal to our, our biological potential? It's all relative. I wouldn't limit to 8 ingredients. I think that variety is important, especially over the day, week, month, and year. Personally, I don't like to make smoothies with 8 ingredients. I'd prefer to have 1 to 5 ingredients at a max, and often 1 to 3. In that case, I do think less is more, in the sense that less variety is going to be easier on digestion. And we have this flawed concept that we need absolutely every nutrient in every food group at every single meal. This just makes no sense. There's no example of it in nature. You go out to nature, and what happens? Every single animal out there, when the food is available, will eat one food at a time when hungry till full. And I'm not saying that that needs to be the norm for us, but experiencing mono meals, experiencing eating meals of one type of food at a time. And again, if you have blood sugar issues, or if you just really enjoy it, include some greens with it, right? But simplifying the meal, but bringing variety over the day, week, month, and year with the seasons is really important for vibrant, robust health, and to make sure we get enough of everything. So yeah, I wouldn't limit it to 8 ingredients. It is possible that we can survive, with 8 ingredients if they're well picked, for sure, and probably do better than a lot of people on a lot of diets. But it's not the optimal way to go about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great question. So many people, I'm going to say, especially women, I think, have been conditioned, right, to eat less, shrink your body. How do we begin to rewire the mindset and trust that our bodies can bring, show us the way again?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just start off by saying, all the people, women included, that I know that are thriving with this lifestyle for 10, 20 plus years, they eat more than everyone else around them. They always eat a lot. And again, this is a diet of abundance. We're talking about super high water content foods that are the most satiating foods on the planet. So it does take some time, and it does take some unlearning. It is sometimes tough to get out of that kind of mindset, and the thought a lot of times for women, like, don't eat too much. You don't want to be seen as like a piggy eating all the time, and right. So it's like, it is just coming into self and knowing that you're worth it, and that this is a diet of abundance, and that it is hard to overdo. And the more relaxed around food we can be, the more benefits we're going to get from it, right? So coming back and slowly trusting our body's intuition, again, knowing that it's harder to overdo than underdo, and just slowly including more. And I mean, maybe that takes, for a time, eating on your own for a while and not necessarily being around other people, so that you can feel more comfortable playing around with the volumes needed, before you start to feel comfortable and confident that you're doing it in the way that you want to be presenting to others, right? But the example shows it, nature shows it, and our actual needs show that that's what it takes, right? So it just takes reframing it and practicing it, like anything.
Yeah, and eating this way, with high, fruits and vegetables and all raw, is different in, like what you're sharing. Eating only a few different, or one, just an abundance of, say, bananas or whatever. That's another different concept that even whole food, plant based, people that eat cooked food, or even if it isn't cooked food, don't generally. I haven't heard generally think that way, like more like what you were saying, where you want to get as much in at the same time every meal, and it's okay not to do that. And I really love that you shared about animals in the wild, right? Because if they find a fruit tree,
Mhm.
that's what they have. They can't go, well, I don't want this one. What else is there, right? But here
Yeah.
we do that. So you mentioned that many people undereat out of fear in your book,
Yeah.
or from like the desire to control. So,
Yeah.
how can someone gently shift from the fear based eating to more an intuitive, nourishing approach? If you haven't already touched on that, maybe just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that it, for many people, starts with good education, because again, people like to take mainstream information that is applied for mainstream diets and mainstream lifestyles and then just move it over to raw food. And that's where this less is more kind of thing really doesn't fit with raw foods. And it's all pervasive, right? So it takes some good education and really understanding the concepts that we've went over in terms of the different modes of satiation, and the realities around the caloric density of fruits and vegetables. And it just takes practice. It takes practice. It takes an unwinding. I wish there was a magic wand that I could just bop people on the head and, hey, switch that thought. But guess what, it's not quite like that, unfortunately. And we can't even bop ourselves like that. But experience is the best teacher. And you'll know. I mean, if you're under eating, you're going to be driven towards complex carbohydrates or fats. So it's very, very predictable. And this is one of the things that Dr. Graham taught me to simplify things. It's like, if you're craving complex carbohydrates or you're craving fats, you're under eating calories from fruit. If you start thinking paste is food, he's talking about pastries and flour and, noodles, like all these things, right? If you think paste is food, you're under eating calories from fruit. If you're craving salt, you're not getting enough vegetables, right? And I mean, that's the super, super simplest form of it. And the super simplest, I mean, I know like we have this bundle, we have amazing recipes, and you can create so many dishes, any favorite that you've ever thought of, to help on those feast days, to help when you have an extra craving, or if you just are a culinary whiz and you like making fancy recipes. But the very simplest form of a raw food diet is, when you're hungry, eat fruit, all you care for, all you could enjoy, a bite or two more. And if you want to accompany it with some greens, go ahead. And if you don't feel like fruits, or you don't feel like sweet fruits, go for some watery, non-sweet fruits like cucumbers or peppers or tomatoes or zucchini, and have it with a big salad, or make noodles, or do whatever you like, right? But it is really simple when you look at it in that way. But in application is challenging, because again, both our concepts, our physiology, take some time, and it is a process. Our stomach needs to expand, and we're not just living in a completely rational world. There's emotions coming into play, and when the crap hits the fan, that's when we're tested the most. And we typically need to go through our lessons numerous times before we actually make a choice that suits us the best. We're
Yeah.
pretty slow learners, so it takes time, patience, and a lot of self-love.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, health impacts for under eating. I'm wondering, like, what are some long-term risks of chronically under eating, even on the healthiest of diets? I know you mentioned that in your book, and I'd love
Yeah.
for you to just touch on that. Just going back to that way of thinking, that old way of thinking that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, besides intense cravings and it being common for people then to go into binge purge patterns, prolonged caloric restriction or just not getting enough nutrition can lead to fatigue, of course, weight loss. It can lead to, poor skin health, to
Mm,
hair falling out, hormone disruption, loss of cycle if you're a woman, or loss of menstruation. And eventually it can lead to death. Unfortunately, there have been a number of people who, like some of the other myths that I went into in my book, like the fruitarian myth and this less is more myth, um, you know, have actually just depleted themselves to a point where they passed away, and it's again being attached to a philosophy and thinking this is a part of the less is more, thinking that it's more spiritual to eat less, and that you're more spiritually aligned if you don't eat and you just live off breath and sunlight. And those are important things for health too, but so is eating enough and getting enough nutrition. We are in a physical body in this physicality. And to me, true spirituality is in alignment with treating your body as it's designed, and being in gratitude for this physical experience. It's a emergence of all these things, not a denial of the physical self. Even the Buddha said that after, lots of restriction and all that stuff. He was like, that's not necessary. That's not the path.
yeah, yeah. We do have a question here from F
Mhm.
Castix. Hi, Chris. Have you got recipes to gain weight?
Mhm.
Now, this book isn't a recipe book that you have in there, but
No.
yeah, maybe you can share about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really anything will do. It just takes getting enough calories. But of course, certain foods are going to be easier to get more calories. So, I mean, some of my favorites are banana smoothies, or even more dense than that are date smoothies. So I don't really recommend snacking on dates. It's really hard on the teeth. It's really easy to overeat. And also it's harder on digestion and insulin function just to eat dried fruit as is. I rather blend dates or any other dried fruit with enough water to make a nice shake. And it's pretty amazing because, like, just for speaking about my volume, like I usually put, say, 15 to 17 bananas in a blender and fill it up. And that's 2 liters of smoothie, right? And that's about 1,500 to 1,700 calories, because one banana is about 100 calories, right? But again, that's 2 liters. Whereas if I take 1 pound of dates and I blend it with a liter and a quarter of water, it makes about a liter and a half of smoothie. And that's going to be about 1,650 calories. So it's more calories per volume. So things like that can help, incorporating some, but not going overboard on fat. So incorporating, say, a handful or two of nuts and seeds to your dinner meal, or an avocado can help with caloric density and satiation and some nutrient density. So they can be a valuable addition as well. But otherwise, to gain weight, most people, when they're talking about gaining weight, they're not talking about gaining fat. I mean, maybe some really thin individuals, but it's not that common. People are like, I just want to gain fat. Like, people want to gain muscle typically. So to
Yeah.
gain muscle, it doesn't matter what you eat if you're not pushing yourself with resistance training. So it takes progressive overload and pushing yourself to the point where it's tough. You're getting to mechanical failure, and then you like, stop and do another set, right? So if you want to gain weight, you got to push yourself hard. You got to challenge yourself. And that's naturally going to increase your appetite and appreciation, as well as your insulin function, to be able to eat larger volumes of these foods. And, again, if you want, you can mix them with greens, and all that stuff helps too. But it takes that pushing, both in terms of stretching your concept of how much calories are needed, as well as pushing your muscles.
Yeah, and I just want to throw in there. I know some people that are going through, and lots of people going through different health issues,
Yeah.
cancer, and different things like that, and they need to gain weight. And
Yeah.
so, this wouldn't be your recommendation for them to be trying to do strength training, or maybe it is. For people that are healing and need to gain weight, is there anything that's different, or would you say this is still the same recommendation or advice?
Yeah, I mean, while we always want to put things in boxes, it is important to consider each individual. And that's why earlier, I didn't want to say specifically what one
Right.
person should do because
In
it's just not
general.
really appropriate, right?
Yeah. In
Um,
general.
in sickness, it's kind of interesting because the medical model says when we're sick, we do one thing, and when we're healthy, we do another thing. The health model instead says when we're sick, we do the same thing as we do when we're well. We just do it in different proportions. So if we're sick, we won't be pushing exercise because that's enervating, but we want some movement. You know, we still want water. We still want to be eating the most healthy foods for us to support our overall health, right? But again, each situation needs to be fine tuned to the individual and where they're specifically at and where they've come from, right? So while there are these general guidelines we've talked about throughout this whole thing that fit for the vast majority of people as a generality, there's always tweaking to go on, not only for the age, the fitness level, the history, if they're well or if they're sick. But also with preference, because there are different ways of doing this as well. It doesn't, someone else's raw food diet doesn't have to look exactly like mine, it's just, I'm
Right.
giving the overview and you can fine tune it. Some people like to have more sprouts and a little bit less fruit, or some people like to have a little more fat, and some people like to have very little fat. And some people like to really eat loads of juicy fruits and rarely any sweet fruits. And if they get enough calories from them and enough of other stuff, that's great. Other people like to have more or less meals less often and eat more meals of sweet fruits, right? So there's a lot of variety. And I mean, some people love salads 2 meals a day or giant salads. And, myself, I like to have one big fruit meal and then a big kind of more savory vegetable based meal rather than a salad. So again, there's variety and it depends on the individual.
Yeah, and like you said, this is just general information. We're not giving
Yeah.
any individual advice, but I just wanted to bring that up. There is a comment here from Else. Hi, Else. Else said, I think the scale gets in the way. I have let it take control. Diet mentality, even though I'm doing so well. That's not a question, but a comment because I do know that a lot of people depend on the scale.
Yeah.
And so, but with this style, with this type of eating, you don't have to do that. It's such a different way of looking at things, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, absolutely. Focusing instead on health and how you feel is a much better marker, and recognizing that most people are coming from a bit of a depleted state. So in some cases, they might find that they either gain a teeny bit or lose more than they want. It can be different depending on the individual. But as long as you're eating until total satisfaction, you're not going to bed hungry, and you're feeling good and you start to see symptoms go away, well, you're on the right track. And if not, then you can talk to someone to help fine tune that or read and learn more and, find more information. But that's the general flow.
Okay, are you good to answer a question here?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, let's put this one up there. This is from Nicole Echo. What are the basic steps to help anyone go raw vegan without having to do a prolonged water/juice fast? I'm
Yeah.
wondering so I can properly assist my mom, who I want to make sure she is absorbing
Yeah,
the,
that's a good
the, the
question.
nutrients of all the new raw things she's eating coming from a lifetime of eating cooked food.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a misnomer that we need to do a fast or a juice fast to start a raw food diet. In fact, I generally recommend people instead just find balance with a whole foods based high raw diet or all raw diet rather than going into something that is a little bit more intensive, for brings a more intense detox, and also it's a therapy, like that's like a short-term therapy. If someone wants to learn how to be successful with a lifestyle, I find applying the lifestyle and gaining confidence, competence, and consistency with a lifestyle is the most important thing, so that can start by, depending again, if they are habitually eating a lot of fat, they're pre-diabetic and stuff like that, it may be wise to start with lower sweet fruits, so more berries and stuff like that. Still salads and greens and cooked carbohydrates for a period of time, eating a whole foods, plant-based, lower fat, high carbohydrate diet. It still includes lots of fruits and, includes all the veggies and stuff, but also includes some steamed potatoes, sweet potatoes, broccolis, all stuff like that for a period of time that is comfortable for them to create a new baseline. Because if the baseline is standard American diet and then you go to juice fast, what's going to happen when the crap hits the wall? They're going to go back to standard American diet. It's going to create intense yo-yoing, which is really hard on the system. Whereas instead, you instill a new normal with abundance of fresh, ripe foods, but also some simple cooked foods that creates a more streamlined, in a direction goal that can become the new normal. And as their physiology, as their desire, as their appreciation shifts to wanting more fresh foods, continually add in more and more fresh foods. It doesn't have to be a race. If somebody's really in a very specific situation, you may want to fine tune it even further. And sure, there can be a time and place for fasting or juicing to expedite that process in intensive situations. But again, like I said before, it is hard to generalize, but that's kind of the way I'd look at it, is moving as rapidly as possible to a high or a low fat, high carbohydrate, fruit and vegetable, high raw diet, and then slowly incorporating more fruits as their insulin function goes up, which it's amazing because you can take a type 2 diabetic, and if you just remove fats from the diet for a period of time, they can reverse type 2 diabetes within days and weeks, and it seldom takes longer than 3 weeks for them to reverse type 2 diabetes. So it's pretty magical.
That is amazing. I mean, I know that I've seen a reversal of so many things, and still it's just inspiring and jaw dropping.
It is, and it's sad when it becomes so normal that it's not as amazing, because I've seen it so many times. It's just predictable. It's really predictable, and that doesn't mean that if you just focus on diet and you don't look at all the other lifestyle aspects, then it's 100% guaranteed. You really want to stack all your cards. And we're talking about sleep and sunshine and relationships. All those things are important as well.
Yeah, I know we're coming up to the hour mark here, and I want to respect your time. So if anyone has any last questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. Also, because I have a few more, but I want to make sure that I give you the opportunity to share anything that we haven't spoken about, anything that really stands out that you want to talk about regarding the Mythbusters or anything else.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been a lot of fun. It's always fun coming on your channel and chatting with you. And I hope that people find this helpful. To me, a very simple kind of way of looking at it is that true health comes from abundance of the things that are good for us, not restriction. This doesn't have to be a diet of, willpower and, like making it a lot harder on ourselves. And it doesn't have to be a race to purity. We don't have to like try and get there in 1 minute. It's like, have some patience, create lasting habits, and enjoy your food. And knowing that this food, again, is like, it's nature's perfect food. It's what we're really designed to be eating, fruits and vegetables. And it is hard to overdo. So enjoy it as much as you enjoy it, and let go of the fear around it.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. I'm just checking to see if there are any more questions. There's a lot of comments, a lot of people thanking you, learning a lot, and so forth. And I know you can see those. Moonlight says, this is helping so much. Thank you. So I'll just add one last question and then we'll sign out. Is how do you, Chris, personally stay grounded in self-love when it comes to your food choices, especially when there's so much conflicting advice out there?
Yeah. Well, it's as simple as eating it. I really look at fruits and vegetables as Mother Nature's love, or God's love made manifest for us. And the more of it we eat, the more love we experience. It's love in action. And we can't help but be actually starting to love ourselves more if we're feeding ourselves love all the time. It's love in action. And that's how I got out of a place of depression and suicidal thoughts, was just starting to treat myself with love. So feed yourself, sleep well, like treat yourself like you would your best friend or a loved one.
Oh, I love that. I love that. That is really wonderful, good advice, and gives a lot of reflection opportunities for people. So, Chris, I just want to thank you so much. This has been a delight. It always is. I always enjoy hanging out with you and hanging out with everyone else that can tune in, even if you're watching the replay. Yeah. And of course, don't forget, you have until the 11th. Don't wait till the 11th, but you do have until May 11th. And if you haven't gotten the bundle yet, go ahead and grab your bundle. It's in both of our bios, the links, and you can download it. You will have until June 30th. So if you get it, don't wait. Just go ahead and download it. You will really enjoy so many wonderful things. So I just want to say, don't forget to eat your greens. And everybody, come on now. Let's give plants a chance. Thank you so much.